seems like some Christians have subjects they talk about over and over and over and over again. But there's one subject that is emphasized tremendously in the Gospels that we very seldom hear talked about in any serious manner. We have talked about it in here before, and that is healing. There's no way to overemphasize healing because that's what the Gospels portray as Jesus' main activity when he was on earth. His reputation, first of all, was as a healer. That's why he drew such large crowds. It's why people paid attention to him. And arguably, that drawing large crowds is what led the Jews to kill him. So Jesus' acts of healing are a key element in his attracting public attention and enticing people to become his followers. Now, Jesus also sent his disciples and others of his followers out to heal people, and they were able to do that. We read in the book of Acts how the healings of the followers of Jesus continued after Jesus had ascended into heaven. And we read in the book of Acts how that is what led many people to become Christians. We just heard a verse about that, and people throng that. Jesus' healing is mentioned 65 times in the Gospel, and there are 24 specific instances of healing by Jesus. The Gospels record throngs of people coming to Jesus seeking healing, traveling long distances, and as we heard in our Gospel reading, going to great lengths to get to Jesus. We heard how one day there was such a crowd around you couldn't get to him, so 4 men let a paralyzed man down through the river. Now the Gospels record instances where when Jesus was passing by, people would call out to him, wanting to be healed. In the very presence of these large witnessing groups indicates how important healing was in the ministry of Jesus. 95% of the healings are among masses of people. It's not that he was in somebody's living room last night at 10 o'clock and they said he healed them. It said he healed people in front of masses of people and everybody saw it. Now, in addition to the 24 healings by Jesus recorded in the Gospels, there are 12 healings recorded in the book of Acts by Jesus' followers. Now, I know I've said this before, but you can't overemphasize this too much. There are no instances of what are called spiritual healings in the Bible. A lot of churches will have what they call healing services today, and they're not saying they're healing sickness. They're just healing someone emotionally or mentally. There is no example of that in the New Testament. Jesus and his followers healed people of real physical diseases. They did not just let people lead them to accept it or something. They healed them of real disease. Now, it is true that Jesus was also known as a teacher in addition to a healer, but the way the Gospels present it, the main thing he did was heal. There is instances where Jesus sent his disciples and other followers out to heal. There's also an interesting instance where someone unknown to Jesus and his followers was healing people in Jesus' name. And this in and of itself indicates that that's what Jesus' reputation was. Healing of real disease is what Jesus was known for. Now, these healings can be divided into 4 categories: exorcism, healing from a distance, healing with just words, and healing with some kind of substance or act. Now, the first category is exorcisms, which is the expulsion of demons or unclean spirits. And Jesus did that by simply addressing the spirit or spirits and telling them to leave, and they did. The next category is healing from a distance. In these healings, Jesus is not present with the person. There are several of those in the Gospels. A Roman centurion sent some of his servants for help with a servant, and it says that Jesus healed this servant from a distance. When the people got back, the man was healed. In another instance, a woman approached Jesus to heal her daughter, and when she got home, the daughter was healed. Now, sometimes people like to think that Jesus' healing ministry was confined to Jews only, but it was not. There are a number of healings of non-Jews. Now, the next category is healing with just words. And some of the more interesting of these involved raising people from the dead. One day Jesus was going down the road. He was approaching the village of Nain, and he saw a funeral procession. And it was of a young man who was the only son of a widow. And Jesus went over and said, "Young man, I tell you to get up." And the man sat up. In the account of Jesus raising his friend Lazarus from the dead, it says that Jesus said a short prayer and then called out for Lazarus to come out, and he came out. When Jesus raised the daughter of Jairus from the dead, he simply went over to the dead body and said, "Little girl, I tell you to get up," and she did. Now finally, there are healings with acts, substances. On 3 occasions, interestingly enough, Jesus used saliva in the healings. And in one instance, in the case of a blind man, it didn't work when Jesus rubbed it over his eyes the first time. It worked a little but not good enough, so Jesus laid his hands on him the second time and the man's sight was restored. In another case, Jesus made a mixture of mud with dirt and saliva, put it on a man's eyes and told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam, and when he did, his sight was restored. There are other instances where saliva is used. Now also in this category is the healings where power was conveyed through Jesus' clothing. There's the well-known account of a woman who touched the hem of his garment. And Jesus said that he knew that had happened because he felt power go out of him. And as we talked about earlier, these healings continued after Jesus ascended into heaven. The first recorded one is in Acts chapter 3, where Peter and John healed a lame man just by telling him to get up. We heard in our gospel, our New Testament reading today about people putting sick people down by the road, and Peter would come by, and if his shadow fell on them, they'd get healed. The book of Acts reports people bringing handkerchiefs or scarves or something to Paul, touching Paul's body with them, and then taking them back to a sick person and touching the sick person with it, and they were healed. That we also see the disciples of Jesus and Philip and Paul healing masses of people at a time, whole groups of people. Now I want to go back for a minute and talk about the healings that involve exorcisms. 8 of the 24 instances of healings in the Gospels involve exorcism. 4 of the 12 recorded in the book of Acts involve exorcism. And of course, an exorcism is casting out an evil or an unclean spirit or a demon, whatever you want to call it. And that's what affects the healing. Now, sometimes these people who are said to have evil or unclean spirits in them were acting crazy. You remember the man that lived in the tombs and he had all the demons in him? But then other cases where people had demons in them, they weren't acting crazy. In one of the earliest healings, it says that Peter's mother-in-law fell ill with a fever, and Jesus went over and rebuked it, thus indicating it was seen to be due to some kind of evil spirit. Many people are portrayed as having many evil spirits. Mary Magdalene was said to have 7. And there were 2 men who were said to have had 2,000 demons between the 2 of them. So I want to look for a minute about some of the things Jesus healed people of. Bones were straightened. A deformity of many years was corrected. A withered hand was healed. A hemorrhage was healed. Conditions existing from birth were instantly corrected. A man born blind had sight. People who had seizures were healed. The deaf were healed. Paralyzed people were healed. Those who couldn't walk were healed. People sick with fever were healed. Now, it's not unfair to say that the New Testament sees the demonic, that is, demonic powers, the powers of evil, as the cause of sickness and disease. And healing involves the confrontation with evil. Now, this is, of course, diametrically opposed to the modern conception of sickness and disease. Modern people not only reject the idea that evil power causes disease, modern people reject the very existence of evil. I read, or at least scan through, a lot of stuff like academic type papers put out by people in religion, like seminary professors and stuff like that. And these papers often come out saying that the belief that there is an evil power in the world is a false belief that people enter into because of psychological reasons. They don't want to make human beings responsible for all evil in the world. According to this modern view of Christianity, there is no such thing as Satan. There is no such thing as evil power in the world. People are responsible for it all. Of course, that's in direct opposition to what the New Testament presents, but these people have an explanation for that. You see, those New Testament writers had psychological needs they were trying to satisfy by making this stuff up about the demonic. And so these people were trying to satisfy their psychological problems. They had deep-seated psychological problems. And these professors and scholars at the seminaries today were trying to figure out exactly what psychological disorders they had to make them make up that. What psychological needs would these people have had to have them to make up all this stuff about evil? The demonic is not real. We know that. We know there's no evil power in the world. If we do think it is, we have a psychological problem. We've got to find something. We've just got to negate that the healings in the New Testament happen. And that is really because the whole worldview of Christianity in our day depends on the healings never having happened really. They've got to be myths. They've got to be made up. And the whole world of our society today depends on them not happening. If the healings really did happen, then that would mean that the modern worldview is false, because the two are incompatible. We know today what causes sickness and disease. It's caused by medical factors. And we know you can't cure somebody by casting a demon. We know people aren't sick because of evil power. You can't cure a sick person by touching a piece of cloth. You can't cure a sick person just by saying, stand up. You can't do it. We know that doesn't work. If that did happen, then that would mean that what we think we know is false. If the healings reported in the New Testament are true, then the medical explanation of disease is false. Since the medical explanation of disease derives from the modern worldview, if the medical explanation of disease is false, the modern worldview is also false. I want us to think something else. Not only does the modern worldview reject the existence of any kind of demonic power in the world, the modern view rejects the existence that demonic powers even exist. Remember, we are told that it was created, made up, because we have psychological needs to feel. So the modern worldview within Christianity, modern Christianity today, is that the demonic is a creation of human beings. How do they know that? Because science tells us there is no power operating in the world other than the laws of physics. That's what it tells us. You see, science not only denies the power of the demonic, it denies the power of God. And science tells us the power of the demonic doesn't exist. But if the healings reported in the New Testament are true, then it does. If people really were healed by having demons cast out of them, then the demonic is in fact real, and science is wrong. And since the modern worldview, including the modern worldview of much of Christianity, says it's based on science, that would mean the modern worldview is wrong. You see what the stakes are here? Science tells us there is no such thing as power active in the world, spiritual power, either good or bad. Science tells us the world runs totally on laws of physics, but yet here is the New Testament telling us the opposite. Even if you say, well, I'll just mark these healings down to unexplained miracles, you can't do that either. Because remember, science tells us the world operates totally on the laws of physics. There are no miracles. The stakes couldn't be higher. The healings have to be made up. They have to be myths. Or else it throws out the whole way we understand the world. It's not just that people think the healings didn't happen. It's that they could not have happened. Why could not they have happened? Because if they happened, then our whole scientific worldview goes down the drain because it's wrong. That's one reason why people are so desperate that the healings must be myth. They've got to be. There's another one. It's not as strong as the first, but it's still there. And that is that the healings no longer occur today. If those healings occurred back then, why don't we see it happening today? Now we see people who style themselves as faith healers, but we normally look at them as charlatans. We don't see people with cancer or heart disease or Alzheimer's being healed miraculously by words. So if we accept that the healings in the New Testament really happened, why don't they happen now? The standard explanation has been to say that the reason they happened back then is that God was jump-starting Christianity. The healings were a temporary thing to get people to pay Christianity attention and get Christianity started. And then the power was removed. It's sort of like if you're opening a business. Let's say you open a business here in downtown. In the first 3 or 4 weeks you're open, you sell stuff at ridiculously low prices just to get people talking about your business and coming in and seeing what you've got on. And then after a few weeks, after your grand opening specials are gone out and people are used to coming in, you put your prices back up to normal level. Well, that's what people say it happened here and then. God just gave that power for a little while to jumpstart things, like a grand opening special. And then once the things were jump-started, he withdrew that power. Now that's a standard explanation a lot of people try to depend on. And I don't know if it's true or not. I can only tell you that there's nothing in the Bible to support it. So if we want to state just what the Bible says, we can't say, well, that's why, because the Bible doesn't say anything about that. I will admit to you that, to me at least, the healings are one of the most perplexing things in the entire New Testament. They are emphasized so much and they have such a prominent place in the ministry of Jesus. And yet most of the versions of Christianity we're familiar with scarcely talk about it. You know, you probably remember learning in Sunday school about the people taking the roof apart and letting the man down, and that was a neat story to learn. But we didn't really learn it because of the healing. It was just a neat thing to think about them lowering him down through the roof. So we really leave those things out today. If we mention them, it's just in passing. They can't have happened, we know they couldn't. Because that calls into mind our entire modern worldview. So, what do we do? If we want to just stick with the Bible and nothing else, then here's what we can do. We can say that the healings really did happen, or else it would be in. Because I'm not ready to stand up and say that the New Testament writers were liars. And if that flies in the face of the modern worldview, then so be it. I wish some of these scientists and some of these medical people, I wish a lot of these people who think they know everything could come back to life in the year 3034, 1,000 years from now, and see what the know-it-alls then think was everything right. You know, you look back 1,000 years and you think how much different we see things than they did. Why do we think people 1,000 years from now won't see things completely different than us? Why do we think our view is the be-all and end-all? Why do we think we have things totally figured out when nobody before us was able to do that? We've got all the answers in 2024. I wish some of these know-it-alls could come back in 3034 and just see what idiots they really are. So my advice to you is let the healings stand. Let them be a reminder to us that there's much more out there than we know. We're a part of something much bigger than we could even imagine. It's a mystery. But it's a good mystery. Because Christianity assures us that at the very end of the road is God. And that God is good. And God is love.